Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, a weekly podcast by Lace Partners, a fundamentally different HR and payroll consultancy. Each week, we tackle some of the most interesting topics facing senior HR professionals. So whether that's from employee value proposition, performance management, people strategy, or even payroll, we cover it all. So join us for the next 30 minutes. And if you like what you hear, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, on with the show. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners. Thank you for joining us. Today, I have the fabulous Gemma Ryall joining me in the hot seat to talk all things AI skills, but also what motivates people linking to it. So I think that's going to be quite a wide-ranging topic. Gems, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. Chris, excited to be here. This is a great topic.
Been a while since we've had you on as well, so I needed to just drag you on, not kicking and screaming because you enjoy doing it, right?
We've been busy with snakes and ladders and all of that sort of stuff.
And if you want to find out more about that, you can go onto the Lace Partners website. We've got quite a few things where we talk about our Skills and Ladders event that we ran. We've also got a couple of blogs. If you want to reach out to the guys, find out a little bit more information, there's a nice video on there where we talk about that linked to our Becoming Skills Powered campaign. And that's the reason why I wanted to get our guest on today. Her name is Nicola Millard. She is the Principal Innovation Partner at BT Business. She is a PhD, which I'm going to get her to explain a little bit about that. She's a fellow Lancaster University alumni as well, so that's another reason for me to get one of my fellow Lancastrians on, even though I'm a fake Lancastrian because I'm actually from London. Nicola, great to have you on. How are you doing?
I am very well, thank you, Chris. I'm a fake Lancastrian as well because I'm originally from Bath, but I currently reside in sunny Suffolk at the moment.
Hey, nothing wrong with that. It's a lovely part of the world, an absolutely lovely part of the world. Now, Nicola, what we're going to do is I'm going to get you to explain a little bit about what you do at BT and the role that you play, because I think it leads into our conversation that we're going to have around the motivated workforce and how AI is shaping engagement and skills. So we're going to get into that in a little bit, but our tradition on this podcast is that we have a nice fundamentally different question, and it's fundamentally different because it's different from anything to do with HR whatsoever. I'm going to get Gems to go first so that we give you a few seconds to compose and choose your choice. But there was an article which I've just read where a chess grandmaster was playing a match against 140,000 people. It was called a mega match, and it's a Norwegian called Magnus Carlsen playing freestyle chess online against the world. I won't tell you the outcome, but the thing that got me thinking, Gems, was if you could be a grandmaster of anything, what would it be?
I'm actually embarrassed about this, but bullet journaling. Because I think if you can really excel at it, you'd be really efficient, get loads of stuff done, and it's pretty as well. So that would be mine.
Mine was going to be really geeky, and I was going to say, like, knowing absolutely everything there is to possibly know about the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Well, that's a good one.
Just somehow have all of that information readily available at any stage. Nicola, what would you go for?
I think I've already achieved that with Star Wars, to be honest, but the MCU is very complicated. No, that wouldn't be mine. I love music and I attempt to occasionally sing and play in bands. I've been trying to master the ukulele, and those 10,000 hours are quite difficult to fit in sometimes. But yes, I would like to be the world's best ukulele player without really having to practice an awful lot. So sadly, not the reality, but I love playing it.
Do you know what? Something like violin as well. I'd love to be able to play that and just be the world's greatest violinist. Just something really clever, and I don't have the talent for it. Maybe in the world in which AI is going to make my job a lot easier and reshape my job. Do you like the perfect segue that we're going into there? Maybe that's something I can consider for the future. But before we get into our questions for the day, Nick, do you want to just tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do specifically at BT?
Sure. Well, I used to be BT's futurologist. I can feel all of the listeners going, well, that's a silly job title. Even AI agreed it was a silly job title, to be perfectly honest. AI clearly had got a list of job titles at some point and went, futurologist? That can't be a real job title. So it stripped out the future bit. And I then became a urologist. So I got onto some quite interesting mailing lists, which thanks to GDPR, I've mostly got off now, thank goodness, because I was learning way too much about things I didn't want to know about the human body. But was a futurologist. And the second question I always get asked, no, that's usually the first question is, do you have a crystal ball? The answer is yes. Someone very kindly gave me one, but I always say I saw no future in it. So I've got rid of the silly job title. I am now Principal Innovation Partner with BT. That doesn't mean my job boring. It's a slightly more boring job title. It just means that I innovate with and for largely our business customers. I spend a lot of time talking to people in multiple sectors about their challenges. AI is a big topic of conversation at the moment. I always say I'm a slightly weird part of the innovation team because I am half a technologist, but the rest of me is a psychologist by background. So I look at the most disruptive part of innovation, which is not necessarily the technology. It's us. Unless we embrace it and use it, it's fairly rubbish and often forgotten. I look at two areas primarily. One is around customer consumer behavior and the other is employee behavior. And in particular, which we're mostly going to dwell on today, looking at the future of work. And we've been doing that officially under the current research banner for about 16 years, way before the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic made it even more interesting in terms of changing work patterns. And now I think we're in quite an interesting area where we're almost old and new ways of working are clashing. And then we've got AI looming in the background, promising a whole load more disruption. So it's a fun area to be in, frankly.
Yeah, it really is. I'm going to fire the first question, just get this general opening question before I let Gems loose, because I'm sure she's already got a few things that she wants to go through. When you and I spoke previously, we were talking about motivation and the factors that motivate people, particularly when you've got this landscape of AI that we're in at the moment. So can I just get kind of, I guess it's a bit of an opening set of perspectives for you on when people are being asked or where they're needing to adopt new ways of working and new technologies. You gave a really good example about call center stuff. So maybe we could kick off with that because I think there was some quite interesting perspectives.
Sure. Well, it was my PhD that inspired that conversation, which I did at Lancaster. My project was around something called motivational user interfaces. There were lots of things in play, but it was for contact center advisors. Contact centers are interesting places to work because it's a very people-centered profession, but there's lots of technology involved and they do tend to be often on the bleeding edge. So obviously with AI, lots of debate at the moment as to whether we need contact centers. The contact center environment is becoming a lot more complex because technology's taken away all of the really easy stuff and they're left with three categories: the complex, the vulnerable, and the angry. They're still having to deal with a lot of those things. But, my PhD was well, AI was around because one of my first jobs in BT in 1990 was AI for contact centers. We were looking at things like knowledge support and we'd implemented this fabulous knowledge system and no one was using it. So I got summoned to our head of customer service, the director. She waggled her finger at me and said, "Why are people not using the system?" That provoked a study around why do people adopt technology in the first place. What we wanted to do with the motivational user interface was to try and understand the fundamental drivers about what gets people out of bed in the morning with their job. There are two elements. One is around what gets people out of bed in the morning, and that after lots of interviews, things like the culture, anything around leadership, how people are managed, whether they feel they're fitting in with the general culture of the organisation, the content of the job, what they're actually doing, whether they find that fulfilling, who they're collaborating with, who's in their team, who do they talk to, do they feel supported. Choice is a very big one, and this is an interesting one where technology is concerned as to how much autonomy do they have in doing their job. And then the final one, which was identified quite late, was curiosity, which is all about how am I developing in my job? Am I acquiring new skills? Is it still exciting me? Am I actually developing as a person? And that could be in work, but that could also be outside work. The one we rejected was competition, which is a motivator. It's a very strong motivator, but it can also produce some quite interesting behaviours, which might be counter to some of the things that you want. And also you have to keep refreshing things with competition. You can't be competitive all of the time and you have to keep changing goalposts. And sometimes people don't like that. So we started to embed that into the interface. But there's also some really horrible psychology around why people accept technologies in the first place. I did a whole TED talk on this, so you can look up TEDx Belfast Met, where I have a very geeky fascination with ticket machines. So there's a whole thing about ticket machines there and why people use them or not. But it boils down to three things. Is it useful to me? Does it help me do my job? Does it make my life easier? Is it usable? Do I need a manual? Do I need to go on a course to do this? Is it intuitive? And that's where things like behavioral economics come in, and you can start to nudge people. The reason people often are on a platform, for example, if we use social media as a good example, social media channel of one is not a good channel. You're probably on whatever platform you are on because you know other people on it. And that's really that sort of peer pressure effect that we can subtly nudge people into using. So useful, usable, used is my mantra in the innovation space generally. It's not just about AI, that's about any technology. Is it useful? Is it usable? And who else is using it? And then what can we do to make those three things easier for people to adopt?
That's really interesting when you're talking about useful, usable, and used. Is there a trust and control angle?
I mentioned autonomy in terms of motivation. So yes, I always say in terms of motivation, you've got intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Now, all jobs are extrinsically motivated because we get paid to do them. There is an extrinsic motivator. We don't necessarily have the same amount of choice when we work in an organization in terms of the technology that we use. It's not like the consumer space. If I don't find a technology useful, I'm probably not going to use it. Enterprise technologies, we often don't have a choice. And also they're not necessarily as easy as consumer tech. So there is a certain amount of extrinsic motivation there. What we were trying to do initially with that research anyway, was to try and sort of say, well, how can we effectively give people a little bit more autonomy, but also enable them to trust the system. Interestingly, when we started to introduce things like AI, people didn't necessarily trust the AI unless they had feedback mechanisms. Certainly for people who've got a lot of experience in the contact center field, we can always point to the most experienced advisors or the people that tend to be the people that people go to when they don't know the answer to a question. If they had been involved with the AI and actually helped to mold the answers, people trusted the AI more than if the AI just gave them a random answer. So there is a trust element in there. That will also be based on other experiences with similar technology and whether it gave the right answers. Interesting at the moment because of generative AI. Well, we kind of trust it, but I keep saying we've automated mansplaining effectively. So it's really convincingly wrong. We do need to re-engage our brains and go, is that right? We need to check stuff, basically. And that can take a lot of work. And sometimes we're just too lazy to do it. So only about 20% of us bother to check, which is rather disturbing because 80% just let the rubbish get through.
So that's interesting. And what we're talking about there, that trust element, one of my questions that we talked about previously is around this idea of data. And can you talk to me about, and actually, Gems, I'd like to get your view on this as well, but we'll go to our guest first, and then you can talk to me about the importance then of people being able to leverage data, give people a certain amount of information and data in order to trust using something like AI.
I mean, AI doesn't work by magic, it works by data. That's always interesting in the innovation space because everyone's excited by AI and they're always coming in and going, oh, what can we do? Can we do a chatbot? And you sort of look at what they want to do and it's fine, but actually the data behind it isn't. One of the problems with generative AI is if the data isn't there, it just makes it up. When you're looking at things like customer service, that's not necessarily the best idea, as a few brands have found to their expense, where they've given completely the wrong advice to a customer. And in risky situations or regulated environments, probably not what you need to do. So we're seeing a hybrid version of AI coming up, particularly in the customer service area, where we've got maybe a generative AI at the top, but it funnels down into data that is trusted data. So it only uses that. It's called guardrails, basically. Now, you can break out of the guardrails, and certainly some malicious customers will taunt the AI to break out of its guardrails. But if you can make sure that it's only supplying the right data, that's a good thing, particularly, as I said, in an environment where that advice is wrong, it could cause some significant brand damage.
Yeah. Gems, any thoughts?
Yeah. So looking at it from a skills sort of lens, when we're looking at skills, we often see businesses go out, scrape data on skills and say, based on your job titles in the past, this is what skills you should have. And we see a mixed response to that. When companies go in and just say, that's what you've got, go with it, the engagement levels tend to be a lot lower versus companies going, look, we've done this to try and save some time, but you need to go in and validate it and provide some insight. So that sort of guardrails that you're talking about feels like you come with a first pass and then you validate it. And then the engagement becomes higher because there's been a way to shape and inform it.
It's quite an interesting one. And also, what I think is quite interesting as well is we talked about this again. I feel like I was joking, just to let you in behind the curtain a little bit. Nicola and I had a bit of a chat about this podcast a few weeks ago, and we joked that we probably could have just hit record then, but I wouldn't have had Gemma with me at the time. So we talked about that data side. But when we talked previously, we've talked about the role that AI is having in helping people to process content quicker. And I think this goes back to this trust thing, isn't it? The expectation on me as an individual to be able to process content so much quicker means that the expectations are that my outputs are then going to increase as well. And you mentioned a complexity that sits behind that. So perhaps you can do a better job than my attempt at reliving our conversation by just explaining what we were talking about there.
Well, it was a few weeks ago and I barely remember what I had for breakfast. But no, I think there's loads of interesting things going on, particularly in the AI world. There were lots of big claims around it was going to improve productivity by, I think it was improve GDP by something like 7%. Yeah. And the interesting thing there is that isn't what's happened so far, at least. We're also, obviously, there's the sort of techno-Armageddon version of it's going to cut lots of jobs. And certainly there are some job losses going on at the moment that are largely attributed to AI. But again, that's not necessarily the right picture. Only Klarna, I think, got rid of 700 FTE in their contact centers and they're hiring again. So again, we're seeing that back to contact center. It's a very human thing. So you need well-qualified, well-skilled humans to talk to customers, probably backed up by AI. The other problem is a lot of this is in the knowledge work arena. And on the future of work side, we do concentrate a lot on knowledge workers because they're the ones that are going to be hit. It's predominantly a cognitive technology. So if you're a cognitive worker, a knowledge worker, AI is going to go with it. The debate at the moment, is it actually improving productivity or isn't it? And that's a really intriguing one because it's very difficult to measure what productivity is in a knowledge workspace. Because what do? We do email, we do meetings, we can save time not doing meetings and sending our AI, yay, love that. So, AI can listen to the meeting, summarize the meeting, give me all the action points. I don't need to be necessarily at the meeting. I was reading something this morning that some bosses have decided they're going to have a digital duplicate. They're not going to turn up to meetings anymore. They're just going to send their digital duplicate who's going to basically give the team the briefing with them not being there. So it could be conceivable in the future that everyone in a meeting is not real. Now, aside from the fact that maybe gets me out of death by meeting days, which can only be a good thing, I'm not sure that helps. This is a really interesting debate. Can we see it impacting productivity? Yes and no. Is it generating rubbish? Yes. And that's where a lot of the work comes around. Let's make sure that it's not generating rubbish. And there's been quite a lot in the legal profession around it, making up precedents and things no one's checking. We're also metacognitively lazy. I love that word. This is a situation where when you're driving along and you're following the sat nav and you suddenly realize you're in a river, that's because we've basically entirely outsourced our direction to the machine rather than our eyes. Metacognitive laziness, I think, is a real problem in this area. And the other problem, particularly with skills, is if AI is going to take away all the sort of basic stuff. Somebody put it the other day that the bottom rung of the ladder is breaking. How do you learn to do a job when the AI is doing the bit that everyone who'll be learning to do the job used to do? So how do we get people up to a significant level of productivity? There's so much to think about here around what AI can do, what AI can't do. A lot of what I'm looking at the moment is AI is good at certain stuff. We're good at certain stuff. And actually, theoretically, the combination is great. Going back to chess, AI can play chess and has played chess at grandmaster level for many, many years now. However, we're still taking the bins out. I could build an AI and a robot that would collect my rubbish, put them in bags and put the bins out, as I will be doing tonight. But it would be very expensive. How would you even try and teach it what rubbish looked like? So those basic tasks, actually, AI might not be able to do. And that gives us a clue of where some of the gaps are, where effectively the human might be the better option rather than the AI or the human and AI combination. And that's the trick, trying to figure out who's best at what and then what's the combination good at.
It's a cost thing as well, isn't it? Using this example, we've spent millions of pounds to have a robot take the bins out when actually it was a lot cheaper to get a human to do it. Gems, I don't know if you have any particular thoughts there. I see you nodding.
I do. Cognitive thinking, is that what it was?
Metacognitive laziness.
That's laziness. So on that, I was going to be asking about how does working with AI change how we think and how we work? But my backup question is, what, from an HR point of view, should we be doing? Because if only 20% of people are checking some of that generative AI, the risk of problems forming is greater, and we risk sort of dumbing down a little bit as well. Yep. So my brain's going off in lots of different directions of how do we prepare for that and prevent it from happening?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion at the moment around sludge data effectively. So this is the data that AI has effectively made up and then AI has then learnt from it. So that could potentially be a vast problem. Some are saying this could be the best AI we're using now. It might go downhill. Some are saying this is the worst AI that we're using. So I don't know, but there is a huge risk that it generates a whole load of rubbish that it then learns from. And that can be incredibly problematic because we don't check. The whole thing about metacognitive laziness, there are some extremes here. I use a slightly disturbing analogy around flying planes. A lot of this is around when people add value. In the situation of an airline, the pilot clearly does add value, but largely pilots don't fly planes anymore. It's mostly flown, not by AI, oddly enough. It's been able to fly on autopilot for quite a long time. The problem there is because pilots didn't practice flying planes, they forgot how to fly planes. Pilots are there as the emergency backup. That is their value. But if they then forget how to fly the plane, that is not their value. There was a very tragic case a number of years ago, largely nicknamed Children of the Magenta Line, which goes back to that being in the river after following the sat-nav. This was the fact that pilots tended to turn their brains off and just follow the line. There was a tragic accident where a plane did crash because of all of those things. Now, the great thing about the airline industry is they learn lessons from this. Now, pilots are mandated to either fly a certain number of hours not on autopilot, or they are mandated to train and simulate so that they add the value of the pilots. If we think of an organization as a plane, we still need people that in an organization, even if the organization is very reliant on AI, if things go wrong, we need people that know how to fix it and know how to fly the plane, not an autopilot. That's an interesting one around keeping certain almost redundant skills quite high because they are a value add if everything goes horribly pear-shaped. Compare that with the cabin crew. The cabin crew has very different jobs to do, largely in terms of a customer experience. Most airlines are very similar, whether they're a premium airline or an economy airline. My whole checking in process, getting my boarding pass is absolutely the same. It's only when I get on the plane that I find the value. And of course, then what we tend to try and do with the cabin crew is augment them with AI, but not replace them. They're having to deal with the unexpected, the complex, the angry, and the vulnerable. They're having to deal with people with a way too large a suitcase to bring on the airline. They have to, people with throwing up mid-flight, all of those things they have to cope with. You can't automate that, but what you can do is support them with AI or take away some of the tasks that would take them away from dealing with customers. Of course, that makes their job even more challenging. So how do we make sure that we support their well-being and make sure that they're engaged and motivated as well? That analogy starts to give us some clues as to where the value is. We need to make sure that we take those skill sets up in the pilot's case to make sure that they're the fail-safe, that they know what to do if everything else fails. In the cabin crew's case, they are dealing with unexpected on an almost minute-by-minute basis. How do we then support them so that they can give full attention to the important bit, which is hopefully the customer?
It's really interesting because when you start thinking about it like that, and if you start thinking about it in a business context, use the example of Klarna earlier. Oh, right, we're just going to use AI to replace a whole bunch of jobs, and then actually we need to put those jobs back in. I think there's probably, we have to go, one of the things I'm taking away from it from a skills perspective is doing a proper analysis on how much is AI really going to impact each of the different jobs. Don't look at us as a whole business entity. Look at the work that we have to do and dial up and down what level of AI intervention is actually needed. And that's kind of the future thinking. Gems, I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Are many organizations taking that approach, that mindset as a dialing up and dialing down? Or is it just because what I read in the press or what I see in the papers, it seems like organizations very much, and if you think about CEO, when they're coming out and saying, right, this is what we're going to do. We've had a look and we think AI is going to replace X number of jobs. So that's what we're doing. Whereas actually it's a lot more nuanced than that based on, as the example that Nicola gave with the cabin crews, an airline needs to think about different types of work, different types of jobs and the role that AI plays. So just any kind of final thoughts from you there?
I think it's really interesting because I don't think everyone's looking at it that way in terms of that nuance of dialing up and dialing down. But also to Nicola's point at the very beginning, we're dealing with people. So there's an unknown element and a lack of knowledge around the potential of how AI might dial up or down for those individuals and those skills as well. So definitely room for us to explore and do more in it.
I think this is an interesting time. And I mean, agentic AI is obviously the other big conversation at the moment. It's interesting looking at that Columbia or Stanford did an experiment where they built an entire company from generative AI and looked to see what it could do. It could do about a quarter of the tasks completely unsupervised. It couldn't do the rest of it, or it got into trouble with the rest of it. For example, it was told that it needed to complete a task by talking to a certain person. It couldn't find that person, so it found a random person and reassigned them the name that they were given, then talked to them. So it's kind of where I wish I'd thought of that, because if you can't find somebody, just rename them to the person that you're looking for. That's creative, but obviously isn't that useful. So I think, again, this is this dilemma around, we've got this incredibly powerful technology, but it can't do everything. And we need to figure out, where's the human good, where's the AI good, and then where do we use that combination better? There's a lot of experimentation and innovation that needs to be had over the next 3 or 4 years, with the technology hopefully improving over the next few years as well. So lots and lots of change. We just need to figure out where the human adds the value, where the technology adds the value, and go from there.
And getting the balance between the two right is obviously essential. We are unfortunately out of time today. I had about 7 other questions I wanted to ask, but I am bound by the rules that we set ourselves within this podcast, which is to keep it to 30 minutes. Nicola, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been fascinating.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and Gems, always a pleasure to have you on as my co-host.
Thank you.
Hopefully you've enjoyed this as much as we've enjoyed recording it. If you would like to find out more, what we will try and do is search out for that TEDx that Nicola mentioned. You said it was Belfast Met, was it?
That's the one, yeah. Well, there's several out there, but that's the one about ticket machines.
So we will see if we can find that and then put that one into the show notes. But on behalf of myself, Gemma and Nicola, thank you very much for listening. And hopefully we'll catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye.